welcome to Living in Fiction. I am your host, Arthur Aguirre. I'm a professor in leadership and communication. Living in Fiction is an edutainment podcast where we look at some of the best movies, some ridiculous movies, and some of our favorite movies to see what we've learned to avoid, and what's inspired us. I am finally on season 3 of The Bear. If this is your first episode with me, I have spent the last few weeks looking at multiple episodes of The Bear as we get through seasons 1 and 2, and now we're on season 3 where I'll be doing one episode at a time. So let's go ahead and get started. I finished The Bear very quickly. In fact, I finished it the day of the presidential debate, and my wife and I were like, we watched all of it. Let's save this last episode for after the debate to calm us down. And if you've gotten to the end of season 3, you know that was probably not a good decision. But anyway, let's start with episode 1. In episode 1, titled Tomorrow, this episode focuses on Carmen's culinary journey that led him back to his brother's restaurant. But we also see the aftermath of Carmen getting locked in the walk-in and his initial attempts to make amends. So, I don't know about you all, but after every season, I almost tiptoe into the next one, because for any of us who have had a series that really impacted us or that we just really enjoyed, there's always almost like this trepidation of, are they going to be able to keep up with how good this particular season was? I felt that way. I know for sure I felt that way heading into season 2. Definitely felt that way heading into season 3, but I'm just so pleased with how well this entire season was. But starting off with this first episode and with that soundtrack by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, I mean, I was listening to it and immediately I was thinking, this sounds like something they would do. And then sure enough, it was them. And it's just a beautiful episode. So starting off, I think the big thing that stuck out to me was we're seeing the fallout from what happened at the end of season 2, where Carmen is essentially literally having to pick up the pieces of just like the chaos that happened. But there's also the emotional chaos. Because he didn't listen to Sydney and get the door replaced, he was stuck in there and she was left kind of by herself or with the team. But she was having to lead everything on her own. You know, everything that Carmen said to Claire, the things he said to Richie. And so he's having to make amends for all of these things, or at least attempt to make amends for all of these things. We see the conversation he has with Sydney, which is really good. You know, he says he apologizes. She said, "We made it." And obviously this is written, it's scripted, but that seems intentional. Saying I'm sorry, and instead of getting like a "it's okay" or "I forgive you," she says, "We made it," right? That is still not addressing the harm that was done, you know? But, you know, she says, "We made it," and he said, "No, you made it." And she says, "With everybody else." Like, she's acknowledging the fact that it was a team that made it through it. He says, "Well, I left you alone." She says, "Well, don't let it happen again." He said, it'll never happen again. And so I think, one, it's important that, I've said this multiple times on the show, you should apologize. A key marker of good leadership is being able to acknowledge your mistakes and apologize to people who you've harmed. He does that. He tries to do that with Richie. If you've followed the season before, you can see it comes back with mixed results. But that's not the reason. Like, your intention of apologizing shouldn't just be, I want to get something from this person, or because I've asked for forgiveness, I am supposed to be given forgiveness, right? You should be coming from an authentic place. And that leads to my big takeaway from this episode. Because this episode, in addition to seeing what Carmen's amends are and him trying to fix things, is a journey of how he got to the Bear, right? All the different restaurants he worked at, all the chefs he worked under. And the thing that stuck out to me was you start seeing where he pulled some of his things, some of his techniques or approaches. And oddly enough, the Chef David, who's played by Joel McHale, which clearly he's the only chef that has appeared since the first season, who is clearly the person that sticks out the most in Carmen's mind, whose voice continually plays in the back of his head, is someone that clearly Carmen has strong feelings about, negative feelings about, is someone that he pulls some things from. How emotional he gets, how in people's face he gets when he's stressed out. We've seen that with Marcus. We saw that with Sydney. We see that with Richie when he was locked into the walk-in. And even little things like the way that after there's a scene where he says something really negative to Carmen, and then Carmen looks up and he is cutting the tape, something that Carmen has asked his team to do. And you can see he's tried to pull some things, like Chef Terry is very calm in her approach and in the way that she is talking to people, and even in the environment she's trying to have and create in a restaurant. And Carmen tries to take that on, but it doesn't really suit him very well. And so he still kind of gravitates to Chef David, this really aggressive approach. And even his non-negotiables as he starts writing them out, we see them, we don't get to really hear them until the second episode. But I wrote this down, his non-negotiables are an amalgamation of all these restaurants and chefs and experiences and all these different influences. The problem is he's pulling from all these different people, and if you're trying to be everything to everyone, if you're trying to grab all of these things, it doesn't mean they're all going to work well together. And what stuck out to me is the importance of being authentic, because it still feels that Carmen is trying to prove to this Chef David that he's better than he is, or that he is a good chef, or whatever it might be that he's trying to prove. And so he's doing all of these things in a very inauthentic way. And the example I like using when I'm talking about authenticity, because I love football, is Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick, for those who don't know, is arguably one of, if not the best NFL coach in NFL history, I should say. And because of that, there was this habit from a lot of other NFL teams that assumed, well, if he's very good, what we can do is hire one of his offensive or defensive coordinators, and that'll work out for us. And it happened over and 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 over again. And with not great results. There were some coaches that did okay, some that made it to the playoffs, no Super Bowl wins. And a few of them maybe lasted a year and then they were gone. The problem is a lot of these coaches were, one, trying to replicate and create the same or a similar personality as Belichick, or two, the folks who were hiring them had unrealistic expectations of what to expect and how quickly those results should happen. And I think we all should pull from people that inspire us. I know myself, I have a professor who is now, he started off as a mentor, now he's just a colleague of mine. When I first started, I would pull a ton from him. In fact, I very specifically remember even the hand motions he made during a particular lecture. And when I was able to give a similar lecture, I said almost the exact same thing, word for word, hand motion for hand motion. And, in that moment, it was very inauthentic. I was not teaching, I was acting. And people can read that, people can see that, people can feel inauthenticity. And so now that I'm a little bit older and I kind of got my footing and realized what kind of an instructor I like to be, there are still some things I pull. Like one thing I learned from him is that I like starting most of my classes with music playing as students are walking in. It sets a very cool and calm environment. People get comfortable. But outside of that, I had to create my own persona and realize what felt right to me. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but you still have to be your true self. And if you are trying to be someone else, that's only going to last so long. That front or that facade is not going to hold up. And it's not going to feel comfortable. And if you've watched this season 3, it just feels that way. It doesn't feel authentic like the way we've seen kind of different iterations of this story go. And so that my biggest takeaway from watching episode 1 of season 3 is that you need to be authentic. You need to be your true self so that you give all the other people that you were working with and that you were leading, you are showing them that they can be their true selves. So that is my big takeaway from episode 1. Stick with me for next week when I'll be going over episode 2.